The beauty's ultimate bodyguard began on the morning the entire city watched a woman smile while secretly planning how to disappear. Isabella Hart stood on the balcony of a glittering hotel overlooking the river as cameras flashed below, celebrating the launch of Hart Biotech's revolutionary medical project. Reporters admired her confidence, investors praised her brilliance, and strangers on social media called her the most admired businesswoman in the country, yet only Isabella knew she had barely slept for 3 nights. Hidden inside the pocket of her elegant white coat was a folded note delivered without a stamp or signature. It contained only 7 words. "You survived once. This time you won't." She had burned dozens of similar threats over the years, but this one disturbed her because it included a childhood nickname nobody outside her family had ever known. Her security chief insisted the police would handle everything, but within 24 hours he suffered a fatal car accident that investigators dismissed as mechanical failure. Isabella did not believe in coincidences anymore. While executives discussed profits inside the conference hall, an elderly janitor quietly swept the marble floor near the emergency exit. His gray uniform hung loosely on his shoulders, his beard appeared uneven, and his movements looked slow enough to make people ignore him completely. Nobody noticed that his eyes never stopped observing reflections in polished glass or counting exits without turning his head. His name on the employee badge read Arthur Mills, though that identity existed only on paper. His real name was Ethan Cross, once regarded as the most effective private protection specialist in the world before vanishing from public life after a mission ended in tragedy. Ethan accepted only one assignment each year, always anonymously, always after investigating whether the client deserved saving. When Isabella's late father secretly arranged a protection contract years before his death, Ethan agreed to honor it only if danger truly arrived. That morning he decided the danger had finally come. The celebration reached its peak as Isabella stepped toward the stage to reveal the prototype medical device. Applause echoed through the ballroom until every sound disappeared beneath the sharp crack of shattered glass. Instead of panicking immediately, Ethan reacted before anyone else even understood what happened. He abandoned the broom, sprinted across the polished floor with startling speed, grabbed Isabella around the waist, and threw both of them behind the heavy steel display platform. A high-powered sniper round punched through the podium exactly where her heart had been a fraction of a second earlier. Guests screamed. Crystal chandeliers trembled. Security officers searched wildly for the invisible shooter while Ethan remained completely calm. "Stay down," he said with steady certainty. Isabella stared at the janitor in disbelief. "Who are you? The reason you're still breathing." He did not wait for further questions. Smoke grenades suddenly rolled through broken windows, filling the ballroom with dense gray clouds. Instead of escorting Isabella toward the main exit where frightened crowds rushed together, Ethan dragged her through a maintenance corridor hidden behind decorative curtains. 2 armed men burst through a service door wearing police uniforms. Ethan recognized instantly that their boots belonged to a military supplier unavailable to local officers. Without slowing down, he shoved a rolling cleaning cart into one attacker, disarmed the second with precise movements, and locked both unconscious inside a storage room before either managed to fire accurately. Isabella struggled to keep pace. "You fight like a soldier." "No," Ethan replied while checking every corner ahead. "Soldiers fight wars. I stop funerals." They escaped into the underground parking garage just as explosions rocked the upper floors. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Car alarms echoed endlessly. Ethan guided Isabella into an aging delivery van whose faded paint blended perfectly with dozens of maintenance vehicles. She expected sirens and frantic driving, but Ethan simply waited in silence for almost a minute. "Why aren't we leaving?" she demanded. He pointed toward the exit. 3 black SUVs accelerated through the garage entrance before racing toward the streets outside. "Those cars are chasing your official convoy. They think you're inside." Only after the attackers disappeared did Ethan quietly drive away through a forgotten maintenance tunnel leading beneath the river. Isabella leaned back, finally allowing herself to breathe. She studied the man beside her more carefully. Beneath the artificial beard and aging makeup she noticed scars crossing his jaw and knuckles that belonged to someone who had survived countless violent encounters. "You've been protecting me longer than today." Ethan kept his attention on the road. Long enough to know your coffee is too sweet, you hate elevators, and you still carry your father's fountain pen although it hasn't worked in years. Isabella looked genuinely shaken because every detail was true. Hours later they arrived at an isolated lakeside cabin hidden within thick forests. The modest building contrasted sharply with the luxurious life Isabella knew. Inside were maps, encrypted radios, emergency supplies, and shelves filled with books about history, psychology, survival, and architecture. Nothing suggested luxury, yet everything served a purpose. Ethan handed her plain clothes. Forget expensive dresses. Anyone searching for Isabella Hart expects elegance. Today you're Emily Carter, a freelance photographer. She frowned. I own an international company. For now you're someone who knows how to disappear. During the following days Isabella resisted almost every instruction. She questioned his routines, complained about cold mornings, and argued whenever he confiscated her phone to prevent digital tracking. Ethan rarely answered emotionally. Instead he demonstrated consequences. He left her phone active inside an abandoned gas station before driving away. Less than 20 minutes later armed strangers surrounded the building. Watching from a distant hillside through binoculars, Isabella finally understood how quickly technology betrayed her location. Her frustration gradually transformed into respect. Ethan also refused to treat her like fragile cargo. Every morning he taught practical survival skills, beginning with observation rather than combat. He asked her to describe passing vehicles after hearing engines without seeing them. He challenged her to identify footprints near the lake. He insisted that reading human behavior mattered more than learning punches. Violence is usually the final chapter, he explained. Most people lose because they ignore the earlier pages. Isabella discovered talents she never expected. Years of negotiating billion-dollar contracts had sharpened her ability to notice tiny facial expressions. She learned to predict lies during conversations with remarkable accuracy. Ethan acknowledged her progress with brief nods instead of compliments, making every sign of approval feel genuinely earned. Their growing trust faced immediate testing when a frightened teenager stumbled into the cabin one rainy evening. His clothes were soaked with mud, his lip bled from a recent beating, and he begged for help. Isabella rushed toward him instinctively, but Ethan blocked her path with one arm. Ask him what color the bridge was. The boy looked confused. What bridge? Ethan's expression hardened. The only road here crosses a red bridge. If you came from town on foot, you crossed it. The teenager hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. He reached beneath his jacket for a hidden pistol, but Ethan had already moved. Within seconds the weapon lay across the floor while the attacker groaned beneath a firmly controlled armlock. Isabella watched in stunned silence. How did you know? Ethan answered without triumph. Real fear makes people look for shelter. Fake fear looks for opportunities. They relocated. Immediately, traveling through abandoned railways, mountain villages, crowded fishing ports, and forgotten industrial districts where nobody recognized Isabella without her public image. Along the journey they encountered ordinary people whose lives briefly intersected with theirs. An elderly widow insisted they stay for dinner despite having little food herself. A retired mechanic repaired their vehicle without accepting payment after Ethan quietly fixed the man's failing generator overnight. A group of children challenged Isabella to an improvised soccer match, laughing when she tripped over uneven grass. These peaceful moments contrasted sharply with the relentless danger following them, reminding Isabella that the world contained kindness beyond boardrooms and headlines. Meanwhile their enemies grew increasingly frustrated. The attacks became smarter instead of louder. Bank accounts connected to Isabella mysteriously froze. News broadcasts falsely reported she had fled the country after committing financial crimes. Former allies publicly distanced themselves to protect their own reputations. Ethan remained unsurprised. Destroying someone's name is cheaper than hiring assassins, he remarked while folding another newspaper. One evening they reached an abandoned observatory high above the mountains where Ethan maintained a hidden communications room. There he contacted an old associate named Mira, a cybersecurity expert who had disappeared from intelligence work years earlier. Through encrypted satellite links she uncovered alarming information. The attacks were not driven by corporate competition alone. Someone inside Heart Biotech had secretly sold classified medical research to a criminal network planning to weaponize experimental biotechnology. Isabella's company had unknowingly become the perfect cover. Worse still, every assassination attempt aimed not only to eliminate her but also to ensure the stolen research remained hidden forever. Isabella replayed years of meetings inside her memory, examining trusted executives through an entirely different perspective. Faces she once associated with loyalty now seemed capable of unimaginable betrayal. Ethan watched her silently before speaking. Don't waste energy asking who disappointed you. Ask who benefited. That single sentence redirected her thinking. Instead of mourning broken trust, she began constructing possibilities with analytical precision. Together they built a list of suspects based not on emotion but on opportunity, financial patterns, and unusual decisions hidden inside years of company records. Late that night, while thunder rolled across distant mountains, the observatory suddenly lost power. Emergency lights flickered weakly before darkness swallowed every hallway. Ethan immediately extinguished the remaining lantern instead of relighting it. Why? Isabella whispered. Because now they can't see us either. Outside, nearly invisible figures advanced through heavy rain, their night vision equipment glowing faintly beneath helmets as they surrounded the ancient observatory from every direction, unaware that Ethan had already anticipated the blackout and quietly transformed the abandoned scientific landmark into a maze of carefully prepared traps, false escape routes, hidden observation points, and misleading sounds, while Isabella tightened her grip on the old fountain pen her father had left behind. Finally understanding that surviving this night would require far more than courage because by sunrise she might discover that the most dangerous enemy had never been outside the walls at all. Inside the darkness Ethan counted each sound with the patience of a chess player studying an opening rather than a man trapped by enemies. Rain struck the cracked observatory dome in uneven rhythms while boots scraped across wet stone outside. Isabella strained to hear what he heard, but to her the storm blended everything together. Ethan gently tapped her wrist twice before pointing toward the eastern hallway. 3 there, he whispered. Then he pointed upward. 1 on the roof. Finally he nodded toward the basement staircase. The smartest one is already inside. Isabella's eyes widened. She had not heard a single footstep. Ethan reached into an old cabinet and handed her a compact flashlight instead of a weapon. She looked disappointed. A flashlight? Light controls attention. Attention controls movement. Tonight that matters more than bullets. Before she could ask another question, the faint metallic click of a door handle echoed below. Ethan motioned for silence. A dark figure slipped into the basement corridor, moving with extraordinary discipline. Unlike the attackers they had encountered before, this intruder paused every few steps, studying shadows rather than rushing forward. Ethan smiled faintly. Professional. The stranger advanced toward the central staircase where a faint emergency light flickered. Halfway up he suddenly stopped. Ethan had expected that. The light was intentionally left visible to attract experienced operatives who distrusted complete darkness. The man crouched, studying the stairwell through night vision goggles. Ethan quietly pressed a hidden switch beneath an old control panel. Instantly dozens of emergency shutters throughout the observatory slammed shut with deafening force. The explosive noise echoed through every corridor, making it impossible. It with Claire's, and tucked Lily's letter into a hidden pocket instead. Ethan noticed the exchange and allowed himself a faint approving nod. She was thinking ahead now without being told. Anna walked to the edge of the platform and looked down the silent tracks. Once you leave through the tunnel, don't stop until you reach daylight. Ethan stepped beside her. And you? She looked toward the station entrance where dark silhouettes were beginning to appear between the columns. Someone has to convince them they found what they came for. Ethan's voice grew firmer. That's not your responsibility. Anna looked at him with calm eyes remarkably similar to Elias's. Neither was waiting 17 years with Lily's letter. For a moment neither spoke. Then Anna reached into her sweater pocket and placed a tiny wooden carving into Ethan's hand. It was another lily, rougher than the others, clearly carved by someone much younger.
Lily made that when she was 12, Anna said. She gave it to me after winning an argument with you. Ethan looked down at the carving. What argument? Anna smiled. You told her bodyguards shouldn't become attached to souvenirs. Despite everything surrounding them, Ethan quietly laughed. A real laugh, brief but unmistakable.
She ignored that advice.
Completely. The first armed figures entered the far end of the station. They wore matte black uniforms without insignia. Spiral emblems glinted faintly on their collars.
Their formation was disciplined, but they advanced cautiously, expecting resistance.
Anna took one step away from Ethan. Go.
He hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then he nodded once.
We'll come back. Anna's answer carried absolute certainty. I know.
Ethan led Isabella and Claire toward the concealed tunnel beneath the tracks just as Anna walked alone toward the approaching operatives. From the darkness behind a broken ticket counter, Isabella looked back one last time. She watched Anna raise both empty hands as the soldiers surrounded her. Their commander approached, said something too distant to hear, and Anna answered with a calm smile. Then, to Isabella's surprise, the commander lowered his weapon and bowed his head slightly before escorting her away.
Ethan saw it too.
He didn't slow his pace, but one quiet sentence escaped him as they disappeared into the hidden tunnel.
Interesting. Claire glanced at him. What? Ethan looked back into the darkness where Anna had vanished. They didn't capture her. He turned forward again.
They received her.
For anyone outside to determine where it originated. At the same moment Ethan and Isabella moved in the opposite direction through a narrow maintenance shaft hidden behind astronomical equipment. You planned this years ago?
Isabella whispered while crawling through the cramped passage.
No, Ethan replied. I planned for places like this.
They emerged inside the giant telescope chamber where the broken instrument still pointed toward a cloudy sky through the cracked dome.
Moonlight briefly pierced the storm, illuminating dust drifting through the enormous room.
Ethan knelt beside the telescope base and unlocked a hidden compartment containing ropes, climbing gear, portable cameras, and several folded blueprints.
Isabella stared. You have supplies hidden everywhere. Enough to survive. Never enough to become comfortable.
Suddenly a burst of automatic gunfire shattered the silence from below.
Stone fragments sprayed across the floor. Someone had discovered their escape route.
Ethan calmly attached a thin cable to the telescope framework.
We're leaving vertically.
Isabella looked upward through the damaged dome nearly 30 meters above them.
You're joking. No time for jokes.
Before she could protest, he clipped her harness into the cable and activated a compact ascender. The mechanism quietly lifted her toward the opening while Ethan covered the room below. As she rose higher, she saw armed figures flooding into the chamber from 3 different entrances. One of them noticed her silhouette and shouted.
Bullets ricocheted against steel beams.
Ethan deliberately exposed himself just long enough to draw every weapon toward his position. Instead of returning fire immediately, he kicked over a heavy equipment rack. The enormous structure crashed into the floor, releasing clouds of dust and broken lenses that scattered light in every direction.
The attackers instinctively ducked, believing explosives had detonated. Ethan used those precious seconds to ascend behind Isabella.
They emerged onto the observatory roof where freezing rain lashed across ancient stone. Wind roared around the circular dome with enough force to make standing difficult.
Isabella gasped as lightning illuminated the valley below.
Vehicles surrounded the mountain road, their headlights piercing the darkness like white spears.
They're everywhere. Ethan studied the pattern instead of reacting emotionally. No.
He pointed toward a narrow section of forest left strangely unguarded.
They're inviting us to run there. Isabella frowned. A trap? Exactly. Which means the real escape is somewhere else.
Rather than descending the obvious paths, Ethan led her across the curved observatory roof toward an old weather vane balanced above empty space. He removed a rusted metal cover revealing a maintenance ladder hidden inside the dome itself. They climbed downward through the structure while the attackers searched the surrounding forest for fugitives who had never entered it. At the bottom of the ladder, Ethan opened a forgotten drainage tunnel leading beneath the mountain. Cold water rushed around their boots as they moved through complete darkness guided only by memory. After nearly an hour they emerged beside an abandoned railway bridge several kilometers away. Isabella laughed unexpectedly despite the exhaustion. Ethan looked at her with mild curiosity. "What's funny?" She caught her breath. "Yesterday I worried about stock prices. Tonight I'm crawling through mountain drains with a man who hides survival gear inside observatories." Even Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile. Life adjusts priorities efficiently. They reached a remote freight station before dawn where Ethan contacted Mira using an encrypted handheld transmitter. Static crackled for several seconds before her voice emerged. "You're alive." "Barely." "Status?" Ethan asked. "Bad. I finally identified the financial network behind the stolen research. Good news is it isn't a dozen buyers." She paused. "Bad news is there's only one." Ethan's expression became unreadable. "Who?" "A private organization called Helix Dominion. Officially it doesn't exist. Unofficially it recruits former intelligence officers, biotech investors, military contractors, and organized crime under one command structure." Isabella listened carefully. "Who leads it?" Silence lingered for several moments. Mira finally answered in an unusually subdued tone. "I can't identify the director. Every digital trail ends with the same codename." Ethan already knew the answer before she spoke it. "Atlas." Mira inhaled sharply. "You've heard that name?" Ethan looked toward the horizon where sunlight slowly illuminated the tracks. "I worked for him once." Isabella turned so abruptly she nearly dropped the radio. "You worked for the man trying to kill me?" Ethan nodded without avoiding her eyes. "Years ago. Before I understood what he was building." The confession hung heavily between them. Isabella searched his face for guilt, shame, regret, or deception. She found only quiet honesty. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your survival came first." "No." Her voice remained calm but firm. "Trust comes first. Survival follows." Ethan accepted the criticism without argument. They boarded an empty freight train carrying construction materials across the countryside. Hidden inside a shipping container, they finally had several uninterrupted hours. Isabella demanded the complete truth. Ethan leaned against the steel wall before speaking. 20 years ago I believed Atlas led an elite security organization protecting governments from international threats. Our missions seemed legitimate. Rescue hostages. Recover stolen technology. Eliminate dangerous traffickers. Every assignment appeared justified." He paused, remembering faces he had spent years trying to forget. "Then one operation went wrong. We recovered a scientist developing advanced medical treatments. Atlas claimed the research would save millions. Weeks later I discovered the scientist had disappeared along with everyone on his team. Their work became classified. Those who asked questions never returned." Isabella listened silently. Ethan continued. "I investigated on my own. Atlas wasn't preventing wars. He was creating markets for them. Fear produced profit. Disease created demand. Instability opened governments to manipulation. I resigned." "People like him don't accept resignations," Isabella said quietly. Ethan looked out through a narrow crack in the container wall. "Exactly." By afternoon the freight train entered a sprawling industrial city. Ethan and Isabella separated temporarily to avoid surveillance before reuniting inside an old public library scheduled for demolition. The neglected building contained thousands of forgotten books and almost no visitors. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in a neglected reading room, Ethan recovered another cache left years earlier. Instead of weapons, Isabella found passports, photographs, and handwritten notebooks documenting dozens of previous protection missions. She flipped through one notebook and stopped.
Every client had a name except one. The final pages contained only a photograph of a smiling teenage girl beside Ethan. Isabella looked up. "Your daughter?" Ethan slowly took the picture. Her name was Lily. It was the first time she had ever heard emotion enter his voice. "Atlas found her after I left." He said nothing else. He did not need to. Isabella understood. The silence that followed carried grief too heavy for explanation. She carefully returned the photograph without asking another question. Later that evening, Mira arrived in person disguised as a volunteer delivering donated books. She embraced Ethan briefly before spreading maps across an old wooden table. "I have good news and terrible news." Ethan sighed. "Start with the good." "I located the original research archive your father hid before he died," she told Isabella. "It contains proof that someone inside Heart Biotech collaborated with Helix Dominion." Isabella leaned forward. "And the terrible news?" Mira met her eyes. "The archive isn't stored in a vault." "Where is it?" "Inside your company's headquarters." Isabella stared at the map in disbelief. The one place every enemy expected her to avoid had become the only place containing evidence capable of exposing them all. Ethan slowly rolled up the blueprints while studying every entrance and security route from memory. "Then we're going back." Mira looked at him as though he had lost his mind. "The building is surrounded by police, private security, and Helix operatives pretending to be investigators." Ethan answered with complete confidence. "Good." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Why is that good?" Ethan folded the map into his jacket. "Because when everyone believes they're guarding a fortress, nobody expects two people to walk through the front door pretending they belong there." The following morning the city awakened beneath low clouds that turned every glass skyscraper into a pale reflection of the gray sky. News channels continued broadcasting Isabella Hart's face beside dramatic headlines accusing her of corporate fraud, reckless experimentation, and fleeing justice. Reporters camped outside Heart Biotech's headquarters while politicians competed to condemn a woman who had not yet been allowed to defend herself. Ethan watched the coverage from a small cafe across the river, then calmly switched off the television. "Atlas doesn't just eliminate people," he said. "He rewrites the story before anyone asks questions." Isabella folded the newspaper without anger. Only a week earlier those headlines would have shattered her confidence. Now she examined them like pieces of evidence. Every accusation appeared within 12 hours, she observed. That means the media package was prepared before the attack. Ethan nodded with quiet approval. "Exactly. You're starting to think ahead instead of reacting." Mira arrived carrying 2 garment bags. "Your costumes." Isabella opened hers expecting another plain disguise, but inside hung an expensive navy business suit tailored with remarkable precision. Ethan's bag contained the uniform of a corporate risk consultant complete with identification badges that appeared completely authentic. Mira smiled. "People expect fugitives to hide. They rarely suspect professionals carrying clipboards." By noon Heart Biotech's headquarters resembled a military installation. Barricades lined the streets. Armored security vehicles blocked underground parking entrances. Drone cameras circled overhead while employees passed through multiple identification checkpoints. Ethan and Isabella stepped confidently from an ordinary taxi instead of arriving secretly. Ethan carried a hard equipment case while Isabella wore simple glasses and her dark hair tied into an understated bun that dramatically altered her appearance. She kept her posture relaxed rather than elegant, blending naturally with dozens of consultants entering the building. At the first checkpoint a guard examined Ethan's credentials. "Risk Assessment Division?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Emergency insurance audit ordered by the board after yesterday's attack." The guard frowned. "Nobody informed me." Ethan looked mildly irritated, as though dealing with routine incompetence.
Then I'd recommend calling your supervisor immediately because delaying compliance with an active liability investigation tends to end careers.
The guard's expression changed instantly.
Nobody wanted responsibility for obstructing an audit during a national scandal. He waved them through after a brief radio conversation that never reached anyone senior enough to question the paperwork.
Isabella whispered as they entered the lobby, "You forged all of this?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No."
"Then how?"
"It's genuine."
She stared.
"I submitted the paperwork yesterday."
Isabella nearly laughed despite the danger.
"While we were escaping assassins? Paperwork doesn't stop being useful because people are shooting at you."
The lobby buzzed with controlled chaos.
Investigators interviewed nervous employees while technicians copied computer servers.
Lawyers hurried between conference rooms, carrying stacks of confidential documents.
The confusion created exactly what Ethan preferred, an environment where nobody possessed a complete picture.
They entered an elevator with three strangers discussing insurance policies.
Isabella kept her gaze lowered until one executive glanced toward her.
Her heartbeat accelerated.
She recognized him immediately as Victor Lang, the company's chief financial officer.
Victor had attended nearly every strategic meeting during the previous 5 years. If anyone could recognize her beneath the disguise, it would be him. Instead, Victor offered a polite nod before returning to his conversation without the slightest sign of suspicion. When the elevator doors closed behind him on another floor, Isabella released a slow breath.
Ethan quietly remarked, "People see what they expect to see."
Today he expected an exhausted consultant. They reached the restricted executive level where access required biometric authorization. Ethan stopped beside an emergency maintenance panel and removed a screwdriver from his equipment case.
Isabella assumed he intended to hack the electronic lock. Instead, he disconnected the hallway coffee machine. Within seconds, an employee emerged from a nearby office complaining that nothing in the building worked anymore. While the technician opened the secured service door to inspect the electrical cabinet, Ethan thanked him for the opportunity to investigate possible insurance risks and simply walked through before the security system reset. Isabella followed, shaking her head in disbelief.
"Coffee," she whispered.
"People defend computers," Ethan replied. "Nobody defends coffee." They entered Isabella's former office.
It looked untouched except for sealed evidence markers placed across desks and cabinets. Family photographs remained exactly where she had left them.
A bouquet of flowers given by employees days earlier had already begun to wilt.
Isabella stood silently for several moments, absorbing the strange feeling of becoming an outsider inside the room where she had built her career.
Ethan gently interrupted.
"Your father hid the archive somewhere meaningful, not obvious.
Think like him." Isabella walked slowly around the office, touching familiar objects while recalling conversations from years before. Her father had loved puzzles that relied on memory rather than technology.
She examined paintings, bookshelves, sculptures, and awards but found nothing unusual. Then her eyes settled on an old mechanical clock hanging above the fireplace.
It had never kept accurate time despite repeated repairs.
Her father had always refused to replace it. Smiling faintly, she climbed onto a chair and carefully removed the clock from the wall. Behind it she discovered a tiny brass key taped to the plaster.
Ethan inspected it. "Not for this office." Isabella nodded.
"For the Founders Library." The Founders Library occupied the oldest section of headquarters, preserved as a historical exhibit containing furniture from the company's earliest days. Few employees visited it anymore because nearly every document had been digitized. They crossed several corridors until distant voices froze them in place. Around the corner, Victor Lang approached, accompanied by two unfamiliar men wearing expensive suits. Ethan gently guided Isabella behind a display case while pretending to examine emergency exit signs. The conversation drifting closer forced all three to remain perfectly still. One of the strangers spoke first.
"Atlas expects confirmation before tonight."
Victor answered nervously.
"I've already searched her office."
"Search harder," the second man replied coldly.
the archive exists. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. Victor! The man she had trusted with every financial decision was working directly with Atlas. She instinctively stepped forward, anger flashing across her face, but Ethan quietly caught her wrist without looking at her. His grip remained gentle yet immovable. Victor and the two operatives disappeared down the corridor moments later. Only then did Ethan release her hand. You wanted to confront him. He betrayed my father. And if you had? Isabella looked away, realizing the truth before answering. We'd be dead. They continued toward the founder's library. Dust floated through shafts of afternoon sunlight, illuminating shelves filled with handwritten journals, antique laboratory equipment, and faded photographs documenting the company's earliest discoveries. Isabella inserted the tiny brass key into an old globe standing beside the fireplace. A soft click echoed through the room. One section of bookshelf silently rotated inward, revealing a narrow chamber hidden inside the wall. Unlike the elegant office outside, the concealed room resembled a secure archive. Metal cabinets lined both walls. A single desk supported an outdated computer disconnected from every network. Ethan immediately locked the entrance behind them while Isabella opened the nearest cabinet. Instead of financial records, she found dozens of videotapes carefully labeled by date. He used analog storage, Ethan observed. Impossible to hack remotely. Isabella inserted one tape into the aging player. Her father's image appeared on the dusty monitor. He looked older than she remembered, his expression unusually serious. If you're watching this, he began, then my fears were justified. Isabella, I hope I'm wrong about the people around us. But if I'm not, listen carefully. He explained that several years earlier independent researchers inside Heart Biotech had accidentally discovered a method capable of accelerating tissue regeneration without the devastating side effects that had limited previous experiments. The technology promised to transform emergency medicine, burn treatment, and organ recovery. However, the same breakthrough could also be modified to create aggressive biological agents with unprecedented speed. Rather than patenting the research immediately, he secretly divided every critical formula into separate encrypted components hidden across multiple locations. Knowledge itself is never evil, he said through the recording. The hands controlling it determine its purpose. Isabella fought back tears while watching the final moments of her father's message. Then his tone changed. One more thing. If Ethan Cross is standing beside you. Isabella turned instinctively toward Ethan. Trust him even when you don't understand his decisions. Years ago he saved my life and refused every reward I offered. There are many skilled protectors in this world. Very few honorable ones. The recording ended. Ethan remained silent, clearly uncomfortable hearing praise from a man no longer alive. Before either could speak further, Myra's voice suddenly crackled through Ethan's concealed earpiece with unusual urgency. Ethan, you've got less than 3 minutes. Someone just disabled the building's public security feeds. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. Meaning? Meaning whoever did it doesn't want witnesses. You're no longer the only hunters inside the building. Almost simultaneously the lights throughout the hidden archive flickered once before emergency generators activated, and from somewhere beyond the concealed bookshelf came the unmistakable sound of a slow, deliberate knock, 3 evenly spaced taps, followed by a calm voice that neither Ethan nor Isabella had heard in years but that Ethan recognized instantly from a past he had spent decades trying to escape. Ethan, the voice called almost conversationally, it's been far too long. Open the door. I'd rather not destroy the room before we have our conversation. Ethan did not move toward the door. Instead, he quietly ejected the videotape, handed it to Isabella, and pointed toward the inside pocket of her jacket. Keep it. His voice remained even, but she noticed he had shifted his weight slightly, placing himself between her and the hidden entrance. It was the first time she had seen him prepare for a confrontation before it had even begun. Outside, the calm voice spoke again. Still predictable. You always protect the evidence before yourself. Ethan answered without raising his voice. You're assuming I'm still the same man.
A soft chuckle echoed through the bookshelf.
No. That's exactly why I'm here. Isabella whispered, "That's Atlas?" Ethan gave a slight nod. Not necessarily.
He almost never appears in person.
Then who? Someone who knows me well enough to imitate him.
The silence that followed stretched for several seconds before the bookshelf slowly rotated open by itself. No explosion, no forced entry, no rushing gunman. A single man stepped through the opening wearing a charcoal suit without any visible weapon. He appeared to be in his late 50s, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture relaxed enough to suggest he had entered his own office rather than an enemy's hiding place. Behind him stood 4 armed operatives who remained outside the concealed room instead of crowding inside. The stranger smiled politely.
"Good afternoon, Ethan."
Ethan studied him carefully before replying.
"Marcus Vale." Isabella looked between them.
Marcus spread his hands slightly.
"I'm relieved you still remember me." Ethan's expression revealed nothing. "You trained me."
Marcus inclined his head.
"Among others." Isabella searched her memory. The name meant nothing to her, but the familiarity between the two men carried far more weight than hostility.
Marcus looked at her with genuine curiosity rather than contempt.
"Miss Hart, your father spoke about you often."
You inherited his eyes.
Fortunately, not his stubborn optimism. Isabella answered sharply. "You knew my father?" "Professionally." Marcus smiled. "And briefly as a friend before circumstances became inconvenient." Ethan interrupted. "Skip the performance."
Marcus sighed as though disappointed.
"You always hated conversation." "No. I hate manipulation."
Marcus glanced around the archive before resting his eyes on the empty videotape player.
"You've already watched his message." Ethan remained silent. Marcus nodded knowingly. "Then you've learned about the medical research." Isabella stepped forward. "You murdered him." Marcus looked almost offended. "No.
If I wanted Daniel Hart dead, he would never have lived long enough to record farewell messages."
Ethan watched Marcus closely.
Tiny changes in breathing, eye movement, and posture suggested one surprising conclusion. Marcus believed what he had just said.
Ethan spoke quietly. "You didn't kill Daniel." Marcus smiled. "Correct." Isabella frowned. "Then who did?"
Marcus answered with a single sentence that changed the entire direction of the investigation.
"Atlas stopped following my orders years ago."
The room became completely still. Ethan's eyes narrowed for the first time since Isabella had met him.
"Explain."
Marcus folded his hands behind his back.
"Everyone assumes Atlas is a person." "He was. Once." Isabella struggled to understand. Marcus continued.
"Atlas began as a codename assigned to the director of our organization. Leadership changed. The codename remained. Eventually the position became more powerful than the individual occupying it." Ethan realized where the explanation was leading before Marcus reached it.
"Someone replaced you." Marcus nodded once.
5 years ago."
Isabella stared at him. "Then you're not Atlas anymore." "No." Marcus smiled faintly. "Now I'm merely a man inconvenient to the people using my former name." Ethan considered every mission from the past decade through this new perspective.
Small inconsistencies suddenly formed a coherent picture.
Operations had grown increasingly reckless. Moral limits had disappeared. Entire teams had vanished without explanation. He quietly asked, "Who succeeded you?" Marcus's smile disappeared. "I never saw his face." Ethan remained motionless. "Impossible." "Not if the board feared I wouldn't approve the transition."
Marcus walked slowly toward one of the metal cabinets, deliberately keeping both hands visible.
Power changed quietly.
New orders arrived through encrypted channels.
Familiar voices repeated unfamiliar priorities. Anyone who questioned them disappeared. Isabella looked at Marcus with open suspicion. "Why should we believe you?"
Marcus met her eyes.
"Because if I wanted you dead, I would have brought 40 men instead of 4. Ethan did not relax. "Or because you need us alive."
Marcus acknowledged the point with a slight shrug.
"That too."
Before anyone could continue, rapid footsteps echoed through the library outside. One of Marcus's operatives spoke urgently into an earpiece.
"Multiple teams approaching." Marcus frowned. "Already?" The operative nodded. "They're not ours." Ethan immediately understood. "Your people were followed." Marcus looked genuinely irritated. "Apparently." Isabella looked from one group to the other. "So now both sides are trapped?" Ethan corrected her. "3 sides."
As if answering him, automatic gunfire erupted beyond the library doors.
Bullets shattered glass display cases while frightened employees screamed somewhere farther down the corridor.
Marcus's 4 operatives instantly moved into defensive positions. Unlike the assassins Ethan had encountered before, they coordinated with disciplined efficiency, covering one another without unnecessary shouting. Marcus calmly removed a pistol from inside his jacket.
"Well." He glanced toward Ethan. "Temporary truce?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Only until we leave the building." Marcus smiled. "Reasonable." The library doors burst inward as masked attackers flooded the room wearing black tactical armor without identifying insignia.
They did not announce arrests or demands. They opened fire immediately. Ethan shoved Isabella behind a heavy oak reading table while Marcus's men returned precise bursts that slowed the advance. Ancient books exploded into clouds of paper as bullets tore through shelves.
Marble columns splintered. The Founder's Library, preserved for generations, transformed into a battlefield within seconds. Ethan noticed something unusual almost immediately. The attackers ignored Marcus whenever possible.
Their primary objective remained Isabella.
"They're targeting you," Ethan shouted. Isabella crawled beside him. "How can you tell?" "Their angles." He pointed briefly. "Every movement closes toward your position."
Marcus heard the exchange and grimaced.
"That confirms it." Ethan looked at him. Marcus fired twice before answering. Whoever leads Helix no longer cares about recovering the archive. Another attacker fell. They just want every witness erased. A grenade rolled across the polished wooden floor.
Ethan grabbed Isabella and dove behind a stone fireplace. Marcus pulled one of his own men down beside him.
The explosion shattered windows overlooking the city.
Smoke filled the library. Fire spread across overturned furniture. Sprinkler systems activated moments later, filling the room with cold rain that mixed with drifting ash.
Visibility collapsed. Ethan whispered into Isabella's ear. "Stay close enough to touch my shoulder." She nodded. "Not because you're afraid?"
"Because if I lose sight of you in this smoke, they'll separate us." Together they moved through the chaos while Marcus's remaining operatives covered another route. Suddenly a frightened young employee stumbled from behind a bookshelf, coughing violently. She had clearly hidden there since the shooting began. An armed attacker immediately turned toward her.
Isabella reacted before Ethan could.
She snatched a heavy brass globe from a display stand and hurled it with surprising force. The globe struck the gunman's shoulder, spoiling his aim long enough for Ethan to disarm him.
The employee escaped toward an emergency exit.
Ethan glanced briefly at Isabella.
"Good decision,"
she answered while catching her breath.
"You taught me to control attention." Even in the middle of the firefight, Ethan allowed himself the faintest approving nod.
They reached a service corridor leading away from the burning library. Marcus emerged moments later, alone. His 4 operatives were gone. His suit was torn across one sleeve, and a thin line of blood ran down his forehead.
He noticed Ethan looking behind him. "They bought us time."
There was no triumph in his voice, only quiet acceptance.
The corridor trembled as another explosion shook the building. Ceiling panels collapsed behind them. Emergency lights flickered red. Myra's voice crackled through Ethan's earpiece again. Ethan, listen carefully. I've intercepted Helix communications. Go. The building attack is only a distraction. Someone just accessed the archive's secondary vault remotely. Ethan stopped walking. Secondary vault? Isabella looked confused. My father mentioned only one archive.
Marcus closed his eyes briefly.
Daniel never trusted digital storage. Mira continued, he didn't.
The secondary vault isn't digital.
She paused. It's a person. Ethan's expression hardened. Explain. Mira inhaled slowly. Your father's final research wasn't hidden in a computer or a laboratory.
Years ago he encoded the complete restoration formula into the memory training of one living individual using segmented mnemonic techniques.
The formula exists nowhere else in complete form. Isabella whispered, who? Static briefly interrupted the transmission before Mira answered with a sentence that left all three standing motionless in the smoke-filled corridor.
According to Daniel Hart's private files, that person is you, Isabella.
You don't remember because your father deliberately made sure you couldn't.
For the first time since Ethan had revealed himself in the hotel ballroom, Isabella looked completely lost. Not frightened by bullets or betrayal, but shaken by the possibility that her own mind contained something she could neither see nor control. She searched her memories with desperate intensity. Childhood birthdays, family vacations, evenings spent studying beside her father, arguments over career choices, quiet dinners after her mother's death, they all felt genuine. Nothing resembled the hidden vault Mira described. That's impossible, Isabella whispered.
I would remember. Marcus shook his head. Not if Daniel used layered associative encoding. Ethan glanced at him. You know the technique.
I helped develop it 25 years ago. Marcus answered without hesitation. It was designed for intelligence couriers who couldn't risk carrying written information. The data wasn't erased. It was buried beneath ordinary memories, accessible only through a precise sequence of triggers. Isabella looked from one man to the other. You're telling me my father turned me into a vault without asking? Marcus's expression softened for the first time. He probably believed he was giving you the only protection he had left. Ethan spoke quietly. Whether we approve of his decision no longer matters. If Helix believes the formula is in your memory, they won't stop. Before anyone could say another word, every emergency light in the corridor switched off. Complete darkness swallowed the building for 2 long seconds. Then the backup generators restored dim red illumination. Ethan immediately looked upward. Not another blackout, Isabella said. He shook his head. No. Someone reset the entire internal security network. Marcus checked his watch. Which means every electronic lock just opened. Almost on cue, dozens of doors throughout the executive floor clicked simultaneously. Somewhere nearby came the echo of running footsteps from several directions. Ethan listened carefully, then frowned. Too many. How many? Isabella asked. Enough that they're no longer searching. They know exactly where we are. Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. How? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a compact radio scanner from his pocket, adjusted 2 frequencies, and held it near the corridor wall. A faint rhythmic pulse emerged through the static. Beep, beep, beep. His eyes narrowed. Without warning he reached toward Marcus, grabbed the older man's tie, and ripped it away. Sewn inside the fabric was a rice-sized electronic transmitter. Marcus stared at it in disbelief. That wasn't there this morning. Ethan crushed the device beneath his boot. Someone tagged you before you entered the building. Marcus let out a slow breath. Which means they expected me to find you. Ethan nodded. We were never the objective.
Isabella completed the thought. You were the bait. Marcus's jaw tightened. Clever. Ethan pointed toward a maintenance map mounted on the wall. The roof is compromised. Main exits are surrounded. Basement tunnels are obvious. Isabella looked at him. So where do we go? Ethan studied the blueprint for only a few seconds before tracing an unexpected route with his finger. The museum. Isabella blinked. There's a museum?
Your company built one beneath the original headquarters 30 years ago, Marcus answered.
Most employees don't even know it exists. Isabella frowned. I've never been there. Marcus smiled faintly. Exactly. They descended through narrow service stairs while alarms echoed throughout the building.
Smoke from the burning library drifted downward, forcing them to cover their mouths.
The lower they went, the older the architecture became.
Modern steel gradually gave way to thick stone walls preserved from the original pharmaceutical laboratory founded generations earlier. They finally reached an enormous underground hall filled with historical exhibits, handwritten research journals, antique laboratory equipment, early medical prototypes, and photographs documenting decades of scientific breakthroughs. Dust covered many displays, giving the museum an abandoned atmosphere despite the priceless artifacts surrounding them. Ethan slowed his pace. Too quiet. Marcus nodded in agreement. Isabella noticed something unusual. The lights are on. No one answered because they had all reached the same conclusion simultaneously. Someone had activated the museum moments before they arrived. They continued cautiously until a calm female voice echoed through hidden speakers. Welcome. The single word reverberated through the cavernous hall. Isabella instinctively searched for the source. Nothing. The voice continued. Please don't be alarmed. I've been waiting a long time to meet all of you together. Marcus's expression changed instantly. Every trace of composure disappeared. Ethan noticed. You know that voice? Marcus answered so quietly Isabella almost missed it. No. He slowly shook his head. That's impossible. A section of wall opposite them silently opened. Instead of armed guards, a woman in her early 40s stepped into the museum wearing a simple gray suit with no visible insignia. She carried no weapon. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her expression was calm enough to belong to a university professor rather than the center of a deadly conspiracy. She looked first at Marcus, then Ethan, then Isabella. Finally she smiled. It's good to see all three generations together. Ethan frowned. Generations? The woman looked at him with unmistakable familiarity. Marcus trained you. She turned toward herself. I was trained by Marcus. Then her eyes rested on Isabella. And everything happening now was designed to recruit you. Silence settled over the museum. Marcus stared as though looking at a ghost. Claire. The woman inclined her head. Hello, Marcus. Isabella looked between them. Who is she? Marcus answered with visible disbelief. Claire Donovan. Ethan recognized the name immediately. She died 15 years ago. Claire smiled politely. That report was exaggerated. Ethan's instincts screamed that nothing about the encounter fit previous patterns. Helix assassins killed without conversation. Corporate conspirators negotiated through threats. Claire seemed entirely unconcerned by either approach. She simply stood with her hands loosely folded. You've misunderstood almost everything, she said. Isabella crossed her arms. Then explain. Claire nodded. Gladly. She walked slowly toward an old display case containing the company's first microscope. Helix Dominion was never interested in selling biological weapons. Marcus interrupted sharply. Liar. Claire looked at him with genuine disappointment. You still believe that's what happened after your removal? She sighed softly. Marcus, you weren't removed because you became too moral. Ethan watched both of them carefully. Claire continued, you were removed because you became predictable. Marcus's face hardened.
Predictable? You believed every threat could be solved by eliminating the obvious enemy. Claire turned toward Ethan. He taught you well, didn't he? Ethan remained silent.
Unfortunately, Claire continued, the world evolved.
Isabella stepped forward. Stop speaking in riddles. Claire's attention shifted to her immediately. Very well.
She pressed a small remote hidden in her palm. Every display screen throughout the museum came alive simultaneously. News footage filled the walls.
Civil wars. Pandemic outbreaks. Economic collapses. Terrorist attacks. Medical shortages. Refugee crises. Scientific breakthroughs. Every event unfolded in rapid succession. Claire gestured toward the images. History doesn't belong to the strongest armies anymore. She pointed toward graphs replacing battlefield footage. It belongs to whoever controls recovery. Ethan understood before Isabella did. Claire noticed. Yes. She looked directly at Ethan. Weapons destroy cities. Medicine determines who rebuilds them.
Isabella stared at the surrounding screens.
You want monopoly over life-saving technology. Claire smiled. Not monopoly.
She paused deliberately.
Stewardship. Marcus laughed bitterly. You still disguise ambition with elegant vocabulary. Claire ignored the remark.
Daniel Hart refused to understand that the world had reached a point where unrestricted scientific discovery creates more suffering than progress.
Every cure can become a weapon.
Every breakthrough creates leverage.
Isabella answered firmly.
That's why knowledge should belong to everyone. Claire met her gaze without anger.
A beautiful philosophy. She paused. History has never rewarded it. Before Isabella could reply, Ethan quietly stepped sideways.
The movement appeared insignificant, but Isabella had learned enough to recognize its meaning.
He had seen something. Without turning his head, he spoke almost casually. Claire. She looked at him. You're stalling.
She smiled faintly.
Am I?
Ethan's eyes drifted toward one of the museum balconies high above the exhibition floor. Your snipers are taking too long to settle.
Claire's smile disappeared.
In the same instant, Ethan tackled Isabella behind a massive marble statue as rifle fire shattered the glass displays surrounding them. Marcus dove in the opposite direction while bullets carved long white scars across the stone floor. Claire herself disappeared behind reinforced pillars with practiced speed, proving she had anticipated violence all along. The museum exploded into chaos as priceless artifacts crashed to the ground, alarms wailed through the underground halls, and Ethan realized with chilling certainty that Claire had not gathered them together to negotiate, recruit, or even threaten them. She had assembled every surviving player in one place because someone even higher within Helix had decided the time had come to erase the entire previous generation, including Claire herself.
Marble fragments burst through the air like shrapnel as the statue shielding Ethan and Isabella absorbed another volley.
The deafening echoes made it impossible to determine exactly how many rifles were firing, but Ethan ignored the sound itself and focused on the rhythm. Two shooters reloaded almost simultaneously. A third maintained constant suppressing fire. A fourth waited patiently, firing only when someone attempted to move.
4, Ethan muttered. No, 5.
Isabella remained low beside him.
You counted that? One of them breathes before every shot.
She resisted the urge to look.
Weeks earlier curiosity would have won.
Now she trusted his judgment. Across the museum, Marcus slid behind an exhibit displaying the company's earliest surgical instruments. He fired twice toward the upper balcony, forcing one sniper to duck. Claire, hidden behind a reinforced concrete column, shouted across the hall, "Those aren't my people." Marcus answered dryly, "I already assumed that after they started shooting at you." Another precise burst slammed into Claire's cover, showering her with powdered concrete. She didn't panic. Instead, she reached into her jacket and removed a compact transmitter.
Ethan's voice cut across the room. Don't.
Claire froze.
They're monitoring every signal.
She looked at the transmitter, then quietly placed it back into her pocket.
So you figured that out too?
I figured it out the moment they waited until everyone important arrived.
Another rifle cracked. The bullet struck an old bronze telescope, spinning it off its pedestal with a metallic scream. Ethan glanced toward the fallen instrument and smiled slightly. Isabella frowned. Why are you smiling? They just made a mistake.
Without explaining further, he grabbed the telescope's polished brass tube, twisted it free from its mount, and handed it to Isabella.
Take this. She stared at the antique tube. I still only get strange equipment? You'll understand.
He crawled toward another shattered display while keeping low beneath the line of fire. High above, one sniper shifted position. For an instant, sunlight filtering through narrow skylights reflected off the scope mounted to the rifle.
Ethan saw it. There. He pointed. Use the tube. Realization struck Isabella immediately.
She raised the polished brass cylinder like an improvised periscope, angling it toward the balcony without exposing her own head.
The reflection inside the tube revealed the sniper's exact location. There. Marcus reacted instantly. He fired once.
The sniper disappeared backward without another shot.
Claire watched the exchange with unmistakable admiration. You always did improvise. Ethan answered while relocating again. Survival rewards imagination. Suddenly the museum lights died. Not a flicker. Not an emergency transition. Absolute darkness. Someone had deliberately shut down every electrical system beneath the headquarters.
The only illumination came from faint daylight filtering through narrow ventilation shafts high above.
Silence followed.
Even the gunfire stopped.
Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. After nearly 15 seconds, a single voice echoed through the darkness. Slow. Calm. Artificially amplified. Enough. Neither Ethan nor Marcus recognized it. Claire did.
Every trace of confidence vanished from her face.
She whispered one word. Director. The voice continued. I appreciate everyone's efforts. Its tone carried no anger, excitement, or triumph. Only detached efficiency. You've all exceeded expectations.
A soft mechanical hum spread throughout the museum.
Ethan immediately looked downward. The floor. Tiny red laser dots appeared across the stone beneath every major exit. He understood instantly. Charges.
Marcus reached the same conclusion. They mined the entire perimeter.
The voice continued. The previous leadership has become obsolete.
Claire stepped away from cover.
No. For the first time, genuine fear entered her voice. You promised transition. You misunderstood. The answer came without hesitation. I promised evaluation.
Claire slowly lowered her head.
So, this was my test. Correct.
Ethan studied her carefully. Nothing in her reaction resembled deception. She truly had not expected this. The director continued.
Marcus represented the first generation. A spotlight suddenly illuminated Marcus. You represented the second.
Another beam settled on Claire.
Ethan represented the third.
Now a third spotlight found Ethan despite the darkness surrounding him.
And Isabella.
A final beam illuminated her standing beside the broken statue.
Represents the fourth. Isabella stared upward. I represent nothing.
The unseen voice replied almost gently.
On the contrary. You represent the future of adaptive leadership. She shook her head. I'll never join you.
The voice answered with quiet certainty.
You've already begun.
Her expression hardened.
What does that mean? You've learned observation instead of impulse. You've accepted deception as necessity.
You've allowed one life to be sacrificed so another could survive. You've become capable of making impossible decisions.
Ethan spoke firmly.
She's learned survival.
Exactly.
The director sounded almost pleased.
Leadership begins there. Marcus suddenly laughed. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't mocking. It sounded genuinely amused. You still don't understand people. The museum became silent again. Marcus continued. You measure behavior. You calculate probability. You predict reactions.
He slowly dropped his pistol onto the floor.
But you've never understood choice. Claire looked at him in disbelief. What are you doing? Marcus smiled peacefully. For once. He looked toward Ethan. I'm going to be unpredictable.
Before anyone realized his intention, Marcus sprinted directly toward the center of the museum.
Every hidden sniper immediately redirected their aim. Dozens of shots erupted simultaneously. Marcus ignored them.
Bleeding from multiple wounds, he reached the enormous electrical distribution cabinet standing beneath the central balcony.
Ethan's eyes widened. No. Marcus looked back one final time. Take the girl.
Then he emptied his remaining magazine into the massive transformer.
Sparks erupted. Electricity exploded through the underground hall. The overloaded system detonated with blinding white light. The shockwave knocked everyone to the ground. Ceiling supports cracked. Ancient stone groaned.
The museum began collapsing. Massive beams crashed onto exhibition halls while centuries-old masonry split apart.
Dust swallowed everything. Ethan grabbed Isabella before she could lose consciousness. This way.
He dragged her through a narrow maintenance corridor barely visible behind a collapsed display wall.
Claire emerged from the smoke several meters away. Ethan.
He turned briefly. She was trapped beneath a fallen steel beam.
Not crushed. Pinned. She reached toward him. For a fraction of a second Isabella thought he might ignore her. Instead Ethan immediately changed direction. Together he and Isabella lifted the twisted being just enough for Claire to pull herself free. Claire looked stunned. You still saved me. Ethan answered simply. You weren't trying to kill innocent people.
Before she could respond, another section of ceiling collapsed exactly where she had been trapped moments earlier. The three of them ran through twisting maintenance passages as the underground museum disintegrated behind them. Finally they burst through an emergency exit into open air several blocks from headquarters. The afternoon sky felt impossibly bright after the darkness below. Behind them, the ground trembled. A section of Heart Biotech's oldest foundation sank inward as emergency crews rushed toward the growing collapse. Sirens filled the city. News helicopters circled overhead. Nobody noticed the three exhausted survivors disappearing into a crowded public park. Only when they reached the shelter of dense trees did Ethan finally stop. He looked back toward the collapsing headquarters.
Quietly. Without expression.
Marcus had not survived.
Neither had decades of hidden archives. Isabella broke the silence. My father's recordings. They're gone. Ethan nodded once. The museum. Gone. Claire leaned against a tree, breathing heavily. Not everything. Both Ethan and Isabella looked at her.
She slowly reached into the torn lining of her jacket.
Inside was a thin black memory card no larger than a fingernail. I copied Daniel's final research months ago. Isabella stared. You had it all this time? Claire nodded. Not the formula.
She held up the tiny card.
Only his private journal. Ethan extended his hand. Claire didn't give it to him. Instead she looked directly at Isabella. This belongs to you. Before Isabella could reach for it, a small shadow crossed the grass. Ethan's instincts flared instantly. He looked upward. A delivery drone hovered silently above the trees. Ordinary. White. Commercial. Completely unremarkable. Except for the small blinking red light attached beneath its frame. Ethan's expression changed. Run. Claire looked up just as realization hit her. That's not a camera. The drone folded its landing arms inward. The red light accelerated from a steady blink to a rapid pulse. It wasn't delivering a package. It was diving straight toward them. Ethan did not waste a second shouting explanations. He seized Isabella by the shoulder and drove her sideways down the grassy slope while Claire threw herself behind the thick trunk of an old oak. The drone struck the ground exactly where they had been standing a heartbeat earlier. Instead of erupting into a massive explosion, it burst with a violent flash and a deafening crack that scattered thousands of razor-thin metallic fragments in every direction. The tiny blades sliced through tree bark, shattered park benches, and shredded bushes, but their range was limited. Ethan had recognized the design just in time. He kept Isabella pinned to the ground until the last fragments rattled harmlessly against nearby stone. A frightened flock of pigeons erupted into the air as people across the park screamed and fled without understanding what had happened. Smoke drifted lazily above the crater. Isabella looked at Ethan. That wasn't meant to destroy the park. No, he replied while scanning the skyline. It was designed to kill 3 people without attracting military attention. Claire emerged from behind the tree, brushing splinters from her jacket. They've become bolder. Ethan shook his head. No. More desperate. Sirens already echoed from the streets surrounding the park. Within minutes police, firefighters, ambulances, and journalists would flood the area. Ethan pointed toward a botanical conservatory standing at the opposite end of the park. Crowds. Isabella immediately understood. We disappear inside them. They moved briskly but never ran. Ethan adjusted Isabella's torn jacket to conceal the dirt on her clothes while Claire removed her own blazer, reversed it, and revealed a different color on the inside. Even under pressure she had prepared for changing appearances. The conservatory had become a refuge for dozens of frightened visitors escaping the commotion outside. Children cried. Tourists filmed the smoke rising beyond the trees. Volunteers handed out bottled water. Ethan guided the group through the confusion with calm confidence until they reached the tropical greenhouse hidden behind dense walls of bamboo and towering palms. Moist air fogged the glass roof above them. The sounds of the city faded beneath trickling water and birdsong. Ethan finally stopped near a secluded maintenance corridor. 5 minutes, he said. Then we move again. Claire leaned against the wall, studying him. You haven't asked the obvious question. Ethan folded his arms. Because I already know part of the answer. Isabella looked between them. What obvious question? Ethan kept his eyes on Claire. Why she copied Daniel's journal without telling anyone. Claire gave a tired smile. Go ahead. You weren't stealing it. Ethan spoke almost thoughtfully. You were protecting it from Helix. Claire nodded once. By the time I understood what the organization had become, I couldn't simply walk away. Anyone who resigned disappeared. Isabella crossed her arms. So you stayed. I survived, Claire corrected quietly. There's a difference. Ethan considered her words. How long have you been working against them? Claire answered after a long pause. 3 years. Isabella frowned. 3 years? Then why didn't you expose them? Claire laughed without humor. Expose whom? I never saw the director. I never knew where the real command center was. Every order came through layers of intermediaries who never met one another. Helix stopped being a hierarchy years ago. It became a system. Ethan nodded slowly. Cut off one head and another appears. Exactly. Claire looked directly at Isabella. That's why your father frightened them. Daniel wasn't trying to defeat Helix.
He was trying to make Helix irrelevant by releasing the medical technology freely.
Isabella's expression softened as memories resurfaced.
She remembered her father insisting that life-saving discoveries should never become bargaining chips. At the time she had considered it idealistic. Now she realized he had been quietly resisting an invisible empire. Before she could speak, Ethan suddenly raised one finger.
Silence. Claire stopped talking immediately. Isabella listened. At first she heard only dripping water. Then came a faint metallic squeak.
Ethan slowly turned toward the maintenance corridor leading behind the greenhouse.
A gardener pushed a wheelbarrow loaded with fertilizer bags. Nothing unusual.
He wore ordinary work clothes, moved with measured steps, and even hummed softly to himself.
Ethan watched him pass. Then he whispered, "Wrong shoes." Isabella blinked. "What?"
"Professional-grade tactical soles," Ethan murmured.
"Nobody gardening wears them." The gardener continued walking without looking in their direction. Ethan did nothing. Claire frowned. "You're letting him go?"
Ethan's gaze remained fixed ahead.
"He's not the threat." 3 seconds later another worker entered from the opposite corridor carrying pruning shears. Ethan quietly smiled. "There." Isabella finally saw it. The two workers never acknowledged one another, yet they adjusted their pace with perfect synchronization. Not employees. A coordinated team. Ethan stepped forward before either
operative reached their ideal position. He addressed the first gardener with friendly confidence.
"Excuse me."
The man turned naturally.
"Yes?"
Ethan pointed toward a flowering orchid.
"Beautiful species. How often does it bloom?"
The question seemed harmless, but the operative hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering, "Twice a year."
Ethan nodded pleasantly. "Actually." He suddenly grabbed the wheelbarrow and shoved it sideways.
Hidden beneath the fertilizer bags lay a compact assault rifle wrapped in canvas. The operative lunged for the weapon, but Ethan was already moving. The wheelbarrow tipped over, spilling heavy bags across the path. Claire intercepted the second attacker with surprising speed, striking his wrist before he could raise the pruning shears, which concealed a retractable blade. Isabella instinctively pulled several frightened visitors toward safety rather than joining the fight. Instead of screaming in panic, she shouted clear instructions. "Everyone move toward the front entrance. Stay together. Leave your bags." The crowd responded immediately. Ethan noticed without taking his eyes off his opponent. She was thinking about civilians first. Another change. The confrontation lasted less than 20 seconds. Both disguised operatives lay unconscious among scattered soil and broken flower pots. Ethan checked their pockets. No identification. No phones. Only a single metallic coin engraved with a spiral surrounding a triangle. Claire's face darkened. "I've seen that before." Ethan looked up. "Where?" "Not in Helix." She took the coin. "In a compartment nobody outside senior leadership ever entered." Isabella examined the symbol. "What does it mean?" Claire answered quietly. "I don't know." Ethan slipped the coin into his pocket. "Then we'll find out." An alarm suddenly sounded throughout the conservatory, not the city's emergency sirens, but the building's internal evacuation system. A recorded voice calmly instructed visitors to exit due to a gas leak. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "False alarm." Claire agreed instantly. "They're flushing us out." Instead of heading toward the crowded exits, Ethan led the group deeper into the maintenance network beneath the greenhouse. Narrow service passages eventually opened into an underground irrigation control room humming with old machinery. The space had clearly been forgotten by the public years earlier. Ethan closed the heavy steel door behind them. "This buys us time." Claire inserted the recovered memory card into a small portable reader she carried inside her jacket.
Let's see what Daniel thought was worth risking everything. A simple text menu appeared. No scientific formulas. No laboratory data. Only dozens of dated journal entries. Isabella opened the final one.
Her father's recorded voice began playing through the device. If you're hearing this, then events unfolded almost exactly as I feared. I deliberately separated the formula from these journals because information without wisdom becomes catastrophe.
Whoever now carries this recording must understand one truth before searching for the rest. He paused. The greatest danger was never Helix itself. Ethan and Claire exchanged quick glances. Daniel continued. Helix is only one branch of a much older network competing for control over transformative discoveries. They fight one another as fiercely as they manipulate governments. If Helix is hunting you openly, it means another faction has already entered the game.
Ethan slowly reached into his pocket and removed the strange coin with the spiral and triangle.
Claire stared at it. Isabella looked from the coin to the recorder. Daniel's final words echoed through the quiet control room.
When you encounter the symbol of the Spiral Council, do not assume your enemy and your ally can be distinguished by the side they claim to serve.
The recording ended. For several long seconds nobody spoke.
Then Ethan quietly placed the coin beside the memory card on the metal table.
So Helix isn't the only player. Claire nodded grimly. No. Isabella looked at both of them. Which means everything we've survived so far.
Ethan finished the sentence.
Was only the opening move. No one spoke for nearly a full minute after Daniel Hart's final recording ended.
The constant hum of water pumps beneath the conservatory filled the silence while each of them quietly rearranged everything they believed they understood. Ethan finally picked up the spiral coin again, rotating it beneath the fluorescent lights. It was heavier than an ordinary token, perfectly balanced, with microscopic engravings circling the edges. He pressed one thumbnail against the center.
Nothing happened. Marcus would have broken it open. Claire would have scanned it electronically. Ethan simply studied the wear marks. This wasn't carried as an ornament, he said. Someone used it often. Isabella leaned closer. How can you tell? See the polished edge? It spent years rubbing against fabric. Claire nodded. Like a challenge coin. Ethan shook his head. No. Challenge coins are shown. This stayed hidden. He slipped it into the pocket opposite the memory card. That means whoever carried it didn't want anyone to know they belonged to the Spiral Council. Claire sat on an old maintenance crate, exhaustion beginning to overcome adrenaline. There's something else you should know. Ethan looked at her.
Before Helix became what it is now, intelligence reports occasionally mentioned the Spiral Council. Nobody knew whether it was an organization, a myth, or a codename used to frighten ambitious recruits.
Every investigation ended the same way. How? Isabella asked. Claire answered quietly. The investigators disappeared without leaving bodies. Instead of reacting with alarm, Ethan walked toward the irrigation control panels lining the wall.
Ancient pipes disappeared into tunnels extending beneath the entire park. He unfolded a faded municipal blueprint hanging inside a dusty cabinet.
We're asking the wrong question. Claire frowned. What question should we ask? Not who the Spiral Council is. Ethan traced a route with his finger. Why did they attack Helix today? Neither woman answered immediately. Ethan continued.
They destroyed Marcus. They tried to eliminate Claire. They attempted to kill Isabella. He looked directly at Claire. If they only wanted Daniel's research, they could have waited until Helix finished hunting us.
Claire slowly understood. They interrupted Helix. Exactly. Isabella crossed her arms. So they don't want Helix to win. Maybe. Ethan folded the blueprint. Or maybe they don't want anyone winning. Before the conversation could continue, Myra's voice suddenly reached Ethan's encrypted receiver. Ethan. He pressed the earpiece. Go. I've been monitoring emergency communications. What happened? There was no collapse investigation at headquarters. Ethan stopped moving. What? The authorities sealed the entire district in under 12 minutes. Claire looked up sharply. 12? Mira continued. That's impossible unless the response had already been prepared. Ethan's expression became thoughtful rather than surprised. They expected the museum to collapse. Yes. And there's more. Mira hesitated. I found a passenger manifest from a private flight that landed 3 hours before the attack. Relevant? It carried only one passenger. Who? I don't have a name. Then what do you have? A photograph from airport security. A moment later, Ethan's handheld device vibrated. He opened the image. For several seconds he said nothing. Isabella stepped beside him. The security photograph showed a man in his early 60s wearing a simple dark overcoat and carrying a leather briefcase. Nothing about him appeared remarkable. Except his face. Ethan quietly enlarged the image. No. Claire looked over his shoulder. The color drained from her face. It can't be. Isabella looked between them. Who is he? Neither answered. Finally Ethan spoke. His name is Adrian Wolfe. The name meant nothing to Isabella. Claire whispered it as though speaking of a ghost. I attended his funeral. Ethan nodded once. So did I. Isabella frowned. You both buried him? Claire answered. 21 years ago. Ethan slowly zoomed in on the photograph again. He was the man who created Atlas. Silence filled the room. Claire shook her head repeatedly. No. I identified the body myself. Ethan's eyes never left the screen. Then either someone else died in his place. He paused. Or someone wanted us to believe he did. Mira interrupted again. There's another problem. Ethan almost smiled. There always is. The airport cameras captured him leaving alone. So? No vehicle ever picked him up. Claire frowned. He walked? No. Myra's voice became uncertain. He simply disappeared. Ethan immediately understood what that meant. Blind zone. Exactly. Somebody had deliberately built surveillance gaps into the city's infrastructure long before today's events. Not Helix. Someone with influence extending far beyond a single organization. Isabella looked at the old irrigation map still lying on the table. My father knew. Ethan followed her gaze. He warned us there were older networks. She pointed toward a handwritten note in the margin of the blueprint. None of them had noticed it earlier because it blended with decades-old maintenance annotations. The handwriting matched Daniel Hart's. 3 words. Follow the water. Ethan immediately unfolded the map completely. Blue lines representing irrigation pipes stretched across the city before converging beneath one location. Claire leaned forward. That isn't possible. What? Those tunnels shouldn't connect. They do. Ethan traced the route again. They all lead beneath the original municipal reservoir. Isabella searched her memory. The reservoir was abandoned years ago. Claire looked at her. Officially. Mira spoke through the earpiece. I've found historical construction records. Tell me. The reservoir wasn't abandoned. It was expanded. When? 37 years ago. By whom? Several seconds passed while Mira searched additional files. When she answered, her voice carried unmistakable disbelief. The construction company no longer exists. Ethan waited. It was dissolved 1 week after completing the project. Owner? The documents list a single shareholder. Name? Adrian Wolf. The room fell silent once more. Ethan folded the blueprint carefully. This isn't coincidence. Claire stood despite her fatigue. If Wolf built those tunnels,
he built them for a reason, Ethan finished.
Isabella looked toward the steel door. So that's where we go. Ethan nodded. Eventually. She frowned. Eventually? We're expected. Claire understood immediately. The Spiral Council will assume Daniel left clues.
And Helix will reach the same conclusion.
Ethan looked at both women. If all roads lead to the reservoir.
He folded the blueprint into a tight square.
Then it's the worst place in the city to visit today. Isabella sighed. So what do we do?
For the first time since they had met, Ethan smiled with unmistakable mischief.
We make everyone believe we've already gone. Claire raised an eyebrow. You have a plan. I have half of one. And the other half?
Ethan picked up a wrench lying beside the irrigation pumps and tossed it lightly into his hand.
We're going to let Helix capture us.
Both women stared at him.
Isabella spoke first. Have you completely lost your mind? No.
He looked directly at her.
They've been chasing us for days.
They've committed enormous resources. They're under pressure after today's failure.
He paused. That makes them predictable.
Claire slowly began to understand.
You don't intend to stay captured. I never said I did.
A faint smile crossed Claire's face.
Marcus really did train you well. Ethan shook his head. No.
He glanced briefly toward the memory card containing Daniel Hart's journal.
He trained me to survive. Then he looked at Isabella. You taught me something different. She blinked. I did? He nodded. You reminded me that surviving isn't enough.
Before Isabella could ask what he meant, every light inside the irrigation control room flickered 3 times in rapid succession. Not because of a power failure.
Because someone had deliberately overridden the electrical grid.
Immediately afterward, every radio frequency Ethan monitored erupted with the same short broadcast.
No voice. No music. Only 3 slow piano notes, repeated again and again.
Claire's eyes widened in recognition.
I know that melody. Ethan looked at her. From where? She answered almost in a whisper. It was Adrian Wolf's habit.
When he summoned senior operatives.
She swallowed. He never sent orders. He played those 3 notes. The melody continued echoing through every receiver in the room.
Then, beneath it, a calm elderly voice spoke only one sentence.
Mr. Cross. I believe you've kept me waiting long enough.
The voice ended as abruptly as it had begun.
No threats. No countdown. No demand for surrender. Only a courteous invitation that somehow felt more unsettling than open hostility.
Ethan removed his earpiece and laid it on the metal table. The 3 piano notes continued to echo faintly through the device before fading into silence.
Claire stared at him. That's him. You recognize the voice? She nodded. I only heard it twice in my life. 20 years apart. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. So he's alive. Claire drew a slow breath. If that really is Adrian Wolf, yes. Isabella looked from one to the other. Why does he sound like he's inviting us to dinner instead of hunting us? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because he doesn't think we're capable of escaping. He slipped the earpiece back into place. Confidence changes people's language. Mira spoke again, her voice noticeably faster than before. Ethan, I traced the broadcast. You found him? No. The transmission bounced through nearly 200 relay points. Ethan wasn't disappointed. But
every relay activated within 3 seconds of one another.
Claire understood immediately.
A synchronized network.
Mira continued. Whoever built it controls communication infrastructure across the city. Ethan quietly replied, not just the city. Exactly.
A new message appeared on Ethan's handheld screen.
No caller identification. No routing information. Just a single line.
The first move belongs to the guest. Below it appeared an address.
Not the abandoned reservoir. A downtown concert hall. Claire frowned. That building has been closed for renovations. Mira checked immediately. It was. A pause. It reopened this morning. Ethan almost smiled. Convenient. Isabella folded her arms. You're not seriously considering walking into a trap? I am. She shook her head. You just said the reservoir was too obvious. It is. Then why is this different? Ethan looked at the address again. Because this isn't where Adrian Wolfe wants us. Claire's eyes narrowed. You think someone altered the invitation? No. He looked up. I think Adrian expects someone else to alter it.
Neither woman followed his reasoning.
He continued.
Every player in this conflict has been anticipating everyone else's decisions.
So eventually. He folded the device shut. The safest move is the one your enemies assume another enemy wants. Claire laughed quietly. I forgot how exhausting conversations with you can be. Before Ethan could answer, Isabella interrupted. No.
Both of them looked at her.
We're missing something.
She walked toward the maintenance blueprint again.
My father always hated unnecessary complexity.
She pointed to the handwritten words.
Follow the water, he left this clue. Ethan nodded. Yes. He expected me to find it. Yes. So why would he create another trail leading somewhere else? Silence settled over the room.
Claire slowly tilted her head.
He wouldn't. Isabella continued thinking aloud. If the reservoir matters. She looked at Ethan. Then maybe the concert hall isn't a destination. Ethan's eyes brightened. It's above it. Claire blinked. What? Ethan grabbed the city blueprint again. Within seconds he found both locations. The concert hall stood directly over one branch of the old reservoir tunnels. He looked at Isabella. Excellent.
She smiled despite the tension.
So we don't enter through the front. No. He traced another route. We enter through history. Half an hour later they emerged separately from the Botanical Conservatory, blending into the afternoon crowds. Claire traveled first, dressed in clothes borrowed from the conservatory's lost and found office.
Isabella followed 20 minutes later carrying a camera purchased from a tourist kiosk. Ethan left last, wearing the uniform of a municipal maintenance worker after quietly exchanging identities with an employee who never realized his badge had been borrowed.
No one walked together. No one looked at one another. Three strangers moved independently toward the oldest district in the city. The concert hall dominated. The neighborhood, its restored stone facade surrounded by banners announcing a charity performance scheduled for that evening. Elegant guests had already begun arriving.
Luxury cars lined the street.
Television crews prepared interviews. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary.
Ethan slowed as he passed a newspaper stand. Without looking directly at the entrance, he counted reflections in the polished windows.
Private security. Police. Catering staff. Musicians. Journalists. Too many uniforms. Too many people standing without obvious responsibilities. His suspicion was confirmed when one violinist stepped from a shuttle bus.
The man carried the instrument correctly. But his calluses were wrong.
Not a musician. An operative.
Across the street, Isabella photographed the historic architecture like an ordinary tourist. Using the camera's zoom lens, she quietly surveyed rooftop positions. 3 spotters. 1 communications relay. 2 disguised maintenance crews. She lowered the camera. Weeks ago she would never have noticed them. Now she saw the invisible pattern almost instantly. On the opposite corner, Claire entered a bookstore overlooking the plaza. From the second-floor reading area she observed pedestrian movement through large windows. Then she smiled. Into her hidden microphone she whispered, "They're watching every entrance." Ethan replied, "Good." Claire laughed. "I knew you'd say that." The 3 of them continued circling independently. Nobody approached the concert hall. Nobody attempted entry. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Inside the command vehicle parked 2 streets away, Helix surveillance officers became increasingly confused. Their target had arrived. But wasn't attacking. Wasn't escaping. Wasn't doing anything. Exactly as Ethan intended. Finally, one surveillance commander issued the order Ethan had been waiting for. Expand the perimeter. Security teams began leaving the concert hall to search surrounding blocks. More exits became exposed. More hidden positions revealed themselves. Ethan quietly counted every movement. There. He spoke into the concealed microphone. Northwest Service Alley. Claire saw it immediately. A plain white delivery truck backed toward an underground loading entrance. Unlike the visible security teams, nobody inspected it. No dogs. No scanners. No identification check. It simply entered. Claire whispered, "That's our door." Ethan answered, "No." She frowned. "What now?" "They wanted us to notice it." Across the plaza, Isabella suddenly spoke. "I found another one." Ethan turned slightly. "What?" "A florist." He followed her gaze through a shop window. An elderly woman arranged flowers near the entrance. Customers came and went naturally. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Ethan noticed fresh muddy footprints leading through the rear of the shop. Impossible. It hadn't rained all day. He smiled. Excellent. Claire finally understood. The tunnel. Ethan nodded. Old irrigation access. The florist wasn't guarding flowers. She was concealing an entrance. Without exchanging another word, the 3 separated once more. Claire entered the flower shop first and purchased a bouquet. Nothing unusual. 5 minutes later Isabella entered, asking for directions to a nearby cafe. Still nothing suspicious. Finally Ethan arrived carrying a toolbox. The elderly florist looked up with gentle eyes. She studied him for several silent seconds. Then, without asking his name, she said quietly, "You're later than Daniel." Ethan stopped. The words were too specific to be coincidence. "How did you know him?" The woman smiled sadly. "I'd been watering his flowers for 30 years. She reached beneath the counter and produced an old brass key. Exactly like the one Isabella had found behind the clock. She placed it gently on the counter. "He told me one day." Her eyes settled on Isabella, who had quietly re-entered through the side door. His daughter would come looking for the river beneath the city. She pushed the key toward Ethan. "He's been waiting for you far longer than you realize." Then, without another word, the elderly florist walked into the back room. A moment later the sound of a closing door echoed softly. Claire hurried after her. The room was empty. No rear exit. No open window. No hidden passage. The woman had vanished. Returning to the shop, Claire looked at Ethan. Who was she? Ethan examined the old brass key. Unlike the previous one, this key bore a tiny engraving of a lily. He answered quietly, "I don't know." Isabella gently touched the flower engraved into the metal.
Ethan froze. Claire noticed immediately. "What is it?"
He stared at the engraving without speaking.
Finally he whispered, "Lily." Isabella looked up. "Your daughter." Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly.
The flower was identical to the small symbol he had carved into every birthday gift he had ever made for her. A symbol nobody outside his family had ever seen. Ethan held the brass key so tightly that the edges pressed into his palm, yet he barely noticed the pain. For years he had trained himself to separate memory from action, grief from judgment, but the tiny engraved lily cracked open a door he had kept sealed through discipline alone. Isabella watched him carefully without speaking. She had learned that forcing answers from Ethan never worked. If he chose to explain, it would be because the truth had become useful rather than because silence had become uncomfortable.
Claire examined the empty back room once more before returning to the counter. No hidden doors. No false walls. No trapdoors. She looked genuinely unsettled. "I watched her walk in here." Ethan finally slipped the key into his pocket. "Then stop assuming she disappeared." Claire frowned. "You think she's still inside?" "No. I think she left before we entered." Claire opened her mouth to object.
Ethan calmly pointed toward a watering can standing beside the rear door.
"The water's still moving."
The surface rippled in slow circles.
"Someone disturbed it less than 30 seconds before we walked in."
He then pointed toward the dusty floor. The footprints stopped because they never continued.
Isabella looked down.
"They disappeared."
"No."
Ethan knelt beside the old wooden shelving.
"They overlap."
He shifted one heavy flower rack sideways. Hidden behind it was a narrow vertical shaft barely wide enough for a single person.
Claire stared. "I checked this wall." "You checked the wall." Ethan looked into the shaft. "You didn't check the furniture." The shaft descended into darkness.
Cool air drifted upward carrying the unmistakable scent of damp stone.
"The tunnel," Isabella whispered. Ethan nodded. The florist wasn't protecting an entrance. He looked at the lily key.
She was protecting whoever used it. Without hesitation he climbed down first, followed by Isabella, while Claire carefully replaced the flower rack exactly as it had been. The shaft ended several meters below in a circular brick tunnel older than the city's modern sewer system.
Unlike neglected infrastructure, the passage showed recent maintenance. The floor was clean.
The lantern brackets had been restored.
Fresh electrical cables ran neatly along one wall.
Someone had invested enormous resources into preserving tunnels the city believed abandoned.
Ethan ran one hand across the bricks. "They've been using these for years."
Claire examined faded symbols painted at each intersection.
"They're directional markers." "What do they mean?" "I don't know."
She traced one spiral with her finger. But they weren't made recently. The three continued deeper until the tunnel widened into an underground canal where dark water flowed silently beneath arched ceilings. An old maintenance boat floated beside a stone platform. Its engine had been replaced with an almost silent electric motor.
Isabella looked around. "Someone left this for us." Ethan shook his head. "No." He crouched beside the mooring rope. "The knot." Claire recognized it instantly. "Maritime intelligence." Ethan nodded. "Recent. So we're not the first visitors." He untied the boat and quietly pushed it into the canal.
Minutes later they drifted beneath the city without a single sound except the gentle movement of water against stone. The underground network stretched far beyond anything shown on official maps. Branch after branch disappeared into darkness. Some tunnels were centuries old. Others had clearly been reinforced within the last decade. Every few hundred meters another lily engraving appeared carved discreetly into the stone. Isabella noticed the pattern. "My father marked the route." Ethan studied one carving closely. "No. He pointed toward tiny differences.
The first flower has 5 petals. The next had 6. Another had 7. They're counting. Claire looked ahead. A sequence. Ethan quietly smiled. Daniel wasn't marking direction. He was numbering intersections. Eventually the canal opened into a vast underground reservoir. The chamber was breathtaking.
Ancient stone columns rose from perfectly still water, supporting a ceiling so high their tops disappeared into darkness. Narrow beams of sunlight filtered through forgotten ventilation shafts, illuminating floating dust like drifting stars. In the center of the reservoir stood a circular platform connected by 4 narrow bridges.
Upon it rested a single wooden desk. Nothing more. No computers. No laboratory. No guards. Just an old desk beneath a hanging lantern. Isabella looked confused. This is it? Ethan didn't answer.
He slowly steered the boat toward the nearest bridge.
Halfway there the electric motor died. Not sputtered. Stopped. Completely. Claire checked the battery. Full charge. Ethan looked into the water. We've crossed something. What? I don't know.
He picked up a wooden pole and pushed gently.
The boat refused to move. As though caught by an invisible current.
A calm voice echoed across the enormous chamber. Please leave the boat where it is.
The voice belonged to neither Adrian Wolfe nor Claire.
An elderly man stepped from behind one of the massive columns supporting the reservoir ceiling. He wore simple work clothes stained with grease and dust. Wire-rimmed glasses rested low on his nose. His white hair was untidy. He looked more like a retired engineer than the architect of hidden conspiracies.
He smiled politely. Good afternoon. Ethan remained standing. You've been expecting us. The old man nodded. For many years.
Claire looked carefully at him.
I've never seen you before. I know. He smiled warmly. That was intentional.
Isabella stepped onto the stone bridge.
Who are you?
The old man considered the question.
My name changes depending on who's asking. She frowned. My father knew you. He did. You knew about the research. Yes. You knew he hid clues. I helped him hide them. Silence settled over the reservoir. Ethan studied every movement the old man made. No visible weapon. No earpiece.
No concealed guards.
Nothing. Which somehow made him even more dangerous. Finally Ethan asked, Adrian Wolfe?
The old man chuckled softly.
No.
Claire stared.
Then where is he?
The old man looked upward toward the faint shafts of sunlight.
I imagine. He's wondering why you're here instead of the concert hall. Ethan's expression didn't change.
You expected us to solve the puzzle.
I expected Daniel's daughter to. He looked toward Isabella with unmistakable pride. She did. Isabella stepped closer. My father trusted you.
He trusted very few people.
Why?
Because I was already old enough to know that every powerful organization eventually begins protecting itself instead of its purpose. He slowly walked toward the wooden desk.
I refused every invitation. Helix. The Spiral Council. The governments. They all came. He smiled.
I preferred repairing water pumps. Claire folded her arms.
You're avoiding the question. I often do.
She took one step forward.
Who are you really? The old man gently opened one desk drawer.
Inside lay dozens of handwritten notebooks tied with faded string.
He lifted the top journal. Long before Daniel Hart. Long before Adrian Wolfe. Long before Atlas.
There was another project.
Ethan's eyes narrowed. What project?
The old man looked directly at him.
The Bodyguard project. The words echoed through the reservoir. Isabella glanced instinctively toward Ethan.
Claire slowly lowered her arms. The old man continued. It began after a series of political assassinations nearly 60 years ago.
The objective wasn't creating soldiers. It wasn't creating spies. It was creating guardians.
People capable of protecting lives without becoming addicted to power.
He looked kindly at Ethan. The first generation failed.
He turned toward Claire.
The second became divided. He looked toward the empty darkness beyond the reservoir.
The third was corrupted. Finally his gaze settled on Isabella.
So Daniel attempted something different. She whispered, "What?" He stopped searching for the ultimate. Bodyguard. A faint smile appeared on the old man's face.
He began searching for the person worth protecting. At that exact moment a slow clap echoed through the vast underground chamber.
Once. Twice. 3 times.
The sound came not from the bridges, but from high above.
Everyone looked upward.
Standing on a narrow maintenance balcony nearly 30 meters overhead was a tall man in a dark overcoat carrying a leather briefcase. His silver hair moved gently in the cool air flowing through the reservoir. He looked down at the 4 people below with calm, almost paternal eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. A beautiful speech.
He smiled politely at the old engineer.
It's a pity it belongs to a world that no longer exists.
Ethan's gaze hardened. Claire stopped breathing for an instant.
Even the old engineer's expression grew unexpectedly serious. The man on the balcony removed his gloves with deliberate care.
My name.
He paused just long enough for every eye in the reservoir to remain fixed upon him.
Is Adrian Wolfe.
And for the first time since this relentless pursuit had begun, Ethan Cross saw not merely another enemy, but the man whose decisions had quietly shaped every tragedy of the past quarter-century, including the loss of his daughter. Adrian Wolfe remained on the narrow balcony without bodyguards, without visible weapons, and without the theatrical confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. Instead, he rested both hands on the railing as though addressing old friends after a long absence.
Ethan noticed the detail immediately.
Men who expected to win by force rarely stood so openly. Men who believed they had already won often did. The old engineer closed the notebook in his hands.
You shouldn't have come. Adrian smiled faintly. I could say the same. Claire's attention shifted between the 2 elderly men. You know each other. The engineer nodded. Longer than anyone here realizes. Adrian looked toward Isabella. Your father inherited many admirable qualities. He paused. Unfortunately. He inherited Elias's optimism as well. Isabella looked at the engineer. Elias? The old man sighed. My real name. Adrian inclined his